Welcome back to Moving Experiences, Stories of the CTA. I'm Nora Leerhsen, Acting President of the Chicago Transit Authority. Shermann Dilla Thomas, Chicago's urban historian, has been setting the record straight on this great city and has amassed a tremendous social media following while doing so.
As a historian, in really dark times, you often have a glimmer of hope because you study dark times and you've seen people pull through and you're like, okay, this looks very similar to this.
His content is focused on the deep, fascinating, and positive narratives that shape the city and so often go overlooked. He looks to the past to help us better understand how we got here.
As if it has a name, it has a history.
Through his social media and his touring company, Chicago Mahogany, the Southside native highlights Chicago's people and architecture, making his case loud and clear. And as he says, everything dope about America comes from Chicago. Dilla, thank you for being here.
Oh, no, thank you, Miss Nora. Honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I am so excited. I'm going to contain my excitement a little bit. I've been so looking forward to this. Like many of our listeners, I'm a history nerd too, and I have studied history in undergrad and a master's degree too. So I'm so excited to kind of dive in with you and so admire the work you've done in our city.
Thank you. Thank you for saying so. And like I told you when we met today, thank you for agreeing to, signing up for, accepting, even as interim, a position that's probably very thankless at times, but extremely important. So very honored to meet you and be in conversation with you as well.
Thank you. And I know someone like you understands and appreciates this agency in such a deep way and what it means to our city. So it's one of the reasons I am looking forward to connecting. So why don't you start, Dilla? Tell us, I've heard about your background with your father and how a lot of your love of history is rooted in his passion for history as a Chicago police officer. Can you tell us a little bit about that background?
Yeah, absolutely. My dad, that's funny enough, right? He's a West Sider, went to Manly when it was in elementary school. He went to John Marshall High School, proudly served in the United States Army, went away to Vietnam, came home, and got hired as a CTA bus driver. He drove for about 2 years. And then a family member of his was robbed, and he felt like he wanted to do something about that. And so he left the CTA and joined the Chicago Police Department. And my dad was a cop for 32 years for the Chicago Police Department. He worked the mayoral detail with Harold Washington and Eugene Sawyer. He worked in the housing projects. He was a homicide detective at 51st Street, Area 2. He worked on 111th and Pullman. He worked in Inglewood. He worked on the north side of the Shakespeare District. And so he always had this collection of amazing Chicago stories. And because he worked in various districts, we find ourselves in all sides of the city. You know, cops know where all the great food is. And so when he was off, you know, we'd end up driving to 107th and Avenue A, or, you know, driving all the way to Rogers Park just for, you know, this one particular restaurant that he liked when he was on the clock. But riding through there, you'd see like the languages change. You see the advertising change. You see the color of the people change, particularly when you're looking through the lens of you know, being 8, 9, 10 years old, right? I lived in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood, still live there today, but it's predominantly African American. So with the exception of like going to Chinatown, we didn't see very many Asian Americans. So he's taking us to these places though. We're getting to talk to people and interact with people. And he would always give me like their origin, you know, or the origin of the neighborhood, or, hey, Pilsen is Mexican-American neighborhood today, but it used to be Bohemian, right? And these are just our car conversations. And so now I'm like, well, Dad, what the hell is Bohemian, right? So now we're going down that road, and you're learning as you go. If he couldn't answer a question for me, he was parking me at a library, and the librarian was answering it for me. So learned a lot about Chicago through the eyes of a very seasoned Chicago police officer. It inspired me to want to explore the city. And so the combination of the two, you know, like I was saying earlier today, for recreation, we'd ride the train from one line to the next. And that's also a way that I I learned about the people of Chicago. I learned about what Chicago neighborhoods look like from a different vantage point. So a lot of my love for history comes from him.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think police and CTA employees actually share a lot of their dynamic with the city in the same way that they know deeply the neighborhoods and are passionate about the history of the city in the same way. And yeah, I'm interested. I've always wanted to ask you this about, obviously, history is interesting, right? It's helpful to know facts and share them with people. But there's something that I find knowing history and deeply knowing it, it's uplifting and kind of helps you through life, right? That can be challenging in a lot of ways. And so I was curious your thoughts. Obviously, there's interesting things about history, but what draws you to kind of knowing more about the world around you?
The history of the world around me, I would say, is what draws me into wanting to learn about it present day, right? Learn about the things that are in front of me and then wanting to learn how they got there. And as a historian, in really, really dark times, you often have a glimmer of hope because you've studied dark times and you've seen people pull through and you're like, okay, this looks very similar to this. And so how they got out of this situation was they zigged, they didn't zag, or this other group zagged, and they didn't zig. And so studying and understanding the history of a thing helps you prepare when that thing comes back around. And it allows you to offer hope to yourself and people that you're around and people that you're in community with. But then I'm fascinated. The thing I say every single day on the bus is if it has a name, it has a history. And that's how I kind of connect the thing from back then to the right now, because, we're riding places. Why in the hell is this stop Garfield? Well, because Garfield is what we in Chicago call 5500 South. Okay, well, why do we call, 5500 South Garfield? Well, in the late 1860s, they decided that the southern branch of Chicago would be numbered and they would leave the names alone on the northern branch, right? Well, then why is that have a name if there were supposed to be numbers, right? And well, that's because 55th Street was a part of the township of Hyde Park at the time. And President James Garfield was killed. And Chicago had a lot of people that supported him. And so they changed the name of 55th Street to Garfield in honor of the president that was killed. And that's why I'm standing on 55th Street at the Garfield station, right? Like, that's just how my brain works. And if I understand why it is, it helps me, move forward, right? Now, instead of thinking about that, I'm enjoying the views on the Green Line.
Yeah. No, it's so true. Not to just take everything for granted, but figure out the meaning behind it all. Just deepens life across the board. And you take a particularly positive view of Chicago, and promote that, and that the importance of that. And I know so many people love that about your work. I think CTA has this similar dynamic in terms of people love CTA. There's so much pride around it, and it inspires such good feelings with people. I mean, I often think that famous Carl Sandburg poem, obviously City of Big Shoulders, but the elevated running across downtown just kind of looks like the big shoulders, like the heavy weight of that poem and the churn of the train and the metal clanking together really epitomizes it. And how many movies there are that just start with that image of the elevated.
Quintessential.
Yeah. So talk about CTA in particular, what you think it means for Chicago. And
I had the occasion because my he's not here anymore to defend himself, but my raggedy ass dad wouldn't buy me I actually have on those Jordans today, or a version of them. It was the 92 Olympic Bugs Bunny Jordan 6s. And he wouldn't buy them because in his cop brain, what in the hell do I need $95 shoes for, and I ain't got $95 in my pocket, right? That's what he always say. And so I was like, well, forget this. I'm getting a job, but I'm 14, right, or thereabout. So he's like, well, how the hell you gonna get a job then? And he came home the next day, though, and at the time we were calling our summer program Mayor Daley's Summer Jobs. This was when Richard M. Daley was the mayor, and I got a job working for General Services inside of City Hall. This is the early 90s, and so what I'm doing in there is filing papers, or, somebody had put something in a manila envelope and write a department in the floor, and I had to run it over there. Somebody had to sign the envelope before I gave them the thing. So I'm learning how to fax stuff that we don't even use anymore to earn this money to buy my Jordans. And anyway, so it requires me to take the red line from 79th Street down to, wherever I wanted to get off, Madison, Washington, whatever, and walk over to City Hall. And it was like a July, and there's like party balloons, party hats, blowers, a cake. And this person was retiring, and this was going to be their last time riding the red line. The people that threw them the party, none of them worked at her job. So it wasn't like all these people, I understood it at the office. I couldn't understand, it felt to me like strangers were throwing this lady a party. I have now come to realize that you have a trained family that you see every single day when you guys work the same shift and you go in the same direction, and you build conversation with them. And sometimes, because we care about safety around here, maybe the train needs to stop, but something's on the track that they got to get off. And so you've been in delays with each other. If you were around during the Great Flood of '92 in downtown Chicago, you were there when the train stopped for the first time, and there at that point was like a 50-year history. And so you've been, you've had babies and maybe grandkids if it's now time for you to retire. And so it's CTA, what it means to Chicago, it's like a connector. It's how people discover different things. Your daughter wants this perfect prom dress and you can't find it, but then you ask the person you ride the CTA with every day and they know exactly where you should go. It offers hope, because I know I shouldn't be saying this to the boss of the CTA, and I'm sorry to all the drivers that I'm snitching on, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen a dude with a wrinkled up button up white shirt, some wrinkled pants, and a tie, and he got this little envelope with his little resumes in it. He's like, man, bro, I got this interview at Forest City Mall, and I ain't got no money to get on the bus. The driver let him on. I'm sorry, I'm snitching on y'all. Yep. Pay your fare. Everybody pay your fare. But like, what does that mean to that person? What happens if that person gets the job and now he's taking, it's those type of things. Like you say, it's you've never seen a Chicago movie where the train isn't, almost a character in it, right? It's you think about it's just tons of any Christmas one, they all have I'm trying not to call the name of the movie they got Harrison for, The Fugitive.
The Fugitive, yeah.
Right? He's running on the trains, right? Like,
yeah.
There is a connection, and it gives us it in many ways what it morphed into, names neighborhoods, right? It's a vital part of Chicago. CTA means, I think, more than Chicagoans realize sometimes. When something has been such an anchoring thing and always been there, and good, bad, and ugly, you kind of take it for granted sometimes. And so I think CTA is so vital to Chicago that we've learned to take it for granted because it's always there.
Yeah. What you talk about with sharing the space of the train and connecting people, I think about this a lot, that I think there aren't a lot of spaces left where people share space for an extended period of time like they do when they're sitting on a bus or train, people that don't know each other, that maybe come from different walks of life. And that's one of the most beautiful things about public transit that I find, especially post-pandemic. I think we've lost some of those spaces and people are a bit more isolated. And I'm actually reading, I don't have a lot of time to read it, but there's a book called Bowling Alone that's about the history of communal gatherings in America. And frankly, they're a bit on the decline from a time where we gathered more in our communities. So do you think about that when you cover history or talk about kind of community and gathering and how that's changed over time?
It's that particular portion of studying history for me it's probably the most saddest, and certainly as it relates to our religious institutions, it was more than just God or Allah or Moses, right? It was an opportunity to see other people. An opportunity for people to ask, are you okay? An opportunity to, share ideas and just listen. And if you're a young person, it's these communal spaces allow you to be around mature people. If you're an older person, it gives you an opportunity to be around people that remind you of your youth or inject youthfulness. And so when I study history, that's one of the, I would say, I don't want to use the word sad, but it's one of the things I walk away with that have me feeling a little ho-hum. When I'm studying something and I'm trying to learn something from it to display a message, I often recognize how the communal aspect of a thing really is what, in many cases, led to the innovation of that thing. And now that we have the thing, the communal aspect of it starts to fade, and that's really tough. You mentioned bowling, and there was just a big push for a Southeast Side bowling alley that was owned by African Americans for the last 30 years or so. I was getting ready to close, and they did a crowdsourcing campaign and got the neighborhood, the community to come out and support them for various nights, and that kind of put them back on track to staying open. And I think about how many stories or championships, celebrations happen in that space, how many fond memories people have, and it only comes from being communal. So yeah, it's a vital part of the. I don't know if and I'm getting ready to start doing it now because you're mentioning it. I don't know if I always elocute the fact that I noticed in studying that we were more communal, or the communal aspect of a thing, but a lot of the change comes from the community space and communal space that societies need to push forward. And to your point, maybe we're slow on some of that change because we're not as communal as we need to be.
Yeah, I mean, you bring people together in your bus tours. I think that's a great example. And like you said earlier about history telling you things come in cycles, and the resilience of people, and that the hardest times can also inspire some of the most creative, meaningful things in human history, right? And that's often what's comforting. So if it seems like it's faded, it's probably coming back too.
I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah. Thank you for that. That nothing brightens my day. The tours are typically 2 hours, maybe 2 and some change. And you'll see strangers that have to sit next to each other because they both arrived, and those are the only 2 seats. And by the end of it, they're like swapping phone numbers and that kind of stuff. And that I'm very proud that I play a small part in it.
So I have to ask, I know you're a big promoter of all the things that came first in Chicago. And so I'm a comedy person. I've done a bit of stand-up comedy here in the city and trained at Second City. And I'm curious if you talk about comedy in Chicago and improv, and how the first improvisational comedy troupe actually started at U Chicago.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. I just assumed it was all Second City,
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Oh my goodness. People come to Chicago for that reason, right? And then Chicagoans have, particularly Chicago comedians, have spread themselves across. But I'm always talking about that history. I was invited by Bloomberg Philanthropy to speak at this place called City Labs in Amsterdam. And the second the Uber driver found out I was from Chicago, he's like, "Hey, do you got 20 minutes?" I was like, okay. And he drives me to this place called Boom Chicago, which is an improv comedy club in Amsterdam that's modeled after Second City. And so it's crazy that like a thing that finds its roots in Chicago has made it all the way to the Netherlands, and it's represented though as this Chicago innovation. And when you think about going all the way back to the Red Foxes, right? People give Bill Murray crap because he was out in the burbs, but I don't think they understand that. Wherever your parents park you because they pay the bills, that's one thing. But in Bill Murray's case, in the Belushi brothers' case, the second that they got access to wheels or the train, they were in Chicago, and it was the Chicago dive bars and hot dog stands and Wrigley that gave them the characters that they played, and they mushed it all together. So. Oh man, all the way down to like D-Ray what the hell is High School Musical without Jane Lynch? You know what I mean? Like that's a Chicago, killing the game, and for a black dude, it's like older black men is Richard Pryor, middle-aged younger black men is Bernie Mac. You know what I mean? And then Richard Pryor got his chops in Chicago coming straight up from Peoria, right, and working the clubs here. So, it's we talk about Second City a ton. These folks aren't here, but you don't have a Steve Carell and things of that nature without a second city, man. Chicago, and I think the realness of being a gritty kind of blue collar, the comedy that comes out of danger and grittiness is hilarious. You know, we're always kind of trying to, like you. When I get home, I tell my wife I just met the glass is halfway fullest person I've ever met. Like you just being, it's going to be all right. And I think that sense of humor and that laughter and that ability to have levity about a situation is a uniquely Chicago thing, you know. And even right now on social media, a lady named Corey Bell, who's been performing with Monique and Cat Williams all across the country. And then probably the hottest right now internet comedian is Mojo Brooks out of Chicago. So yeah, we're pretty awesome as it relates to that. And I think the lived experience that you get here in Chicago, and every comedian worth his salt has at least 4 train jokes, right, about what they're seeing on the train or what they've experienced on the train. So all of those things kind of, we're really good at that.
Yeah, there's a lot of CTA focus in comedy.
Oh, man, it's hilarious.
Yeah, but you speak of the grittiness. One of the things I love about stand-up, too, is that kind of crash and burn. You're supposed to constantly be on stage, kind of messing up, trying stuff out, falling flat on your face, cracking people up, like that churn of the work of it is very Chicago too, because you don't just stay in your apartment and write. You're supposed to be out showing yourself, and it's also the adult education of it, I think, is really cool. There aren't a lot of cities that have a cultural, artistic institution like that adults are going to that aren't in a degree or something. You can just take a class here and there. I just think it's one of the most awesome things about the city. You know, I wanted to ask you too, what are your sources for all this information you have, especially now we're obviously in this internet age, but where do you go to learn all this?
Well, you got to be careful if you go into the internet. Yeah. That's for sure. I should better say that. You can go to the internet, but what you're sourcing off the internet is important. You know, if the dude got a curtain up behind him, and, you know, he doesn't look like he's ever read a book, that probably isn't the source you need to be tapping into. But I use ProQuest for one, which just had a son in college a couple years ago, and then now my daughter's a senior in college. And so with their college IDs, you get free access to ProQuest. And for those who aren't aware, ProQuest is a database where academic journals are stored. But also, if a person is pursuing a master's or a PhD and they have to turn in a thesis or a dissertation, many of them get published to ProQuest too. And in the case of a person that's attempting to get a PhD, your work gets challenged. And so you have to like cite the hell out of everything that you're saying, which in a Google search, you won't find a lot of these books or journals that person who got the PhD used to get the PhD. And so those are sources that I tap into a lot. For a lot of Chicago lore, it's really okay to go to our newspaper archives. The Trib has probably the most comprehensive, but so does the Chicago Sun-Times, because it joined with Chicago Daily News, and both of those go back well into the 1800s. If you go to Newberry Library, they have kept, so, you know, now we got these phones and all this other crap, but back in the day, damn near every neighborhood had their own kind of weekly or monthly that talked about things that happened in those spaces. And between the Chicago History Museum and Newberry Library, they have a lot of that in the collections. And so if you want to do a deeper dive about an intimate space in Chicago, I go there a lot. And then if it has Chicago in the name, I probably read it. Particularly all of the Arcadia publishing books. For those who don't or listening, if you walk into a Walgreens and say South Shore, and they'll have the History of South Shore book at the register, if it's written by Arcadia Publishing, then it's a very good chance that they had the South Shore Historical Society create the book for them. And so that stuff's going to be first person and very well sourced.
Wow. That's really good information. I'm re-listening again to all those places you said to find information. When I studied at Chicago, I used the archives of the Chicago History Museum, and there's some really good stuff there. That's where I looked at letters that people wrote to the Chicago School Board in the 1960s, and you can actually listen to recordings of school board meetings from the 60s, and look at the actual letters.
The damn Willis.
All that stuff. Yep. Yeah. So, speaking of that, I know you focus on young people a bit, right? In your work at the DuSable, or tell me more about what you're doing at DuSable.
So right now I am the brand ambassador for the DuSable Museum of Black History. I'm also the chief of social media. My job is to usher in a younger crowd to the museum. It can be anything. We have amazing event space, and for those listening, please consider us to, throw your weddings or your prom send-offs or graduation. We have a theater that's state-of-the-art, that's 400 seats. So a lot of people use those spaces, and as the brand ambassador, I'll show up, give the welcome, kind of hang around, kiss babies, take pictures, that kind of stuff. I also create content for the DuSable Museum. We're working on ways to highlight the exhibits we have, speak to curators, that sort of thing. And then, they put me on the road to raise money, right? You gotta fundraise around here.
Yeah.
So those are my jobs. And, thinking of ways there's a couple exhibits that are kind of older. And so I'm working with a muralist to kind of create stuff on the outside of the building to attract young folks, but also how can we make the exhibits there a little more interactive, things of that nature. So that's some of my job. And then I lead tours on behalf of the museum where we take school kids out and teach them about the neighborhood they're in.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to talk about sources with young people because it feels like it's really hard to explain to kids where to find facts and not false information with all this social media. So you have a really interesting dynamic of being a social media personality, but rooted in real sources and primary sources for the information that you're giving out. So it seems like there's a lot of opportunity to kind of teach kids about facts versus not facts.
Yeah, I'm trying to. It's as soon as you start, if you go too deep down that rabbit hole as it relates to social media, well, then there is in this world people who don't want people to know how to properly research a particular subject. So, there's a line because I don't want to be attacked. I got 7 kids and a wife and all that other kind of stuff that, I don't want to drag into that sort of thing. But what I do a lot since I'm a social media personality, I have a pretty popular Instagram and TikTok page. I do correct or make a lot of correcting statements in other content that I see. I just started doing community notes on Facebook and Instagram, right? So if a post go up, particularly about Chicago, that's historically inaccurate, without demeaning or disrespecting the poster, I say, hey, it looks like you got this information from this place. That is unverified information. This is the accurate information. This is how you can tell if that information is accurate or not. I'm getting yelled at by my wife all the time because she'll be driving and talking, and I'm in my phone just correcting away, and then she's like, "What did I just say?" But I don't know. But are you hungry?
Yeah. Well, that's important word to correct that and push people to the right sources. So, we talked about this, and when I first got this position, you were actually one of the first people I called. I had this feeling like I want to call Dilla and talk about transit and the value of transit, because obviously we're facing this fiscal cliff situation. There's a lot of talk in the media as we look to find a solution to bridge our budget issues. And, something I really want to do and would love to talk to you about is talking about the value of transit in a deeper way. I think, I say a lot, we talk about it in this kind of detached way, like GDP and that's important, right? I mean, what something produces economically, but there's real values and principles and history behind transit. I know you talk a lot about, or I've heard you say, when you see issues of violence in the city, kind of play the tape backwards, right? Of all of the disinvestment and choices that were made by policymakers and people that created that situation. And I'd love to hear you kind of share about your thoughts on what investing in public transit means for people.
Absolutely. It's a direct correlation to everything that we want to work here in Chicago. If you look at the citywide asthma and bronchitis rates for Chicago in its totality, it's something to the tune of about 18%. If you look at spaces that are predominantly black and brown, it's something like 48%, right? More than double. And so that has a cost because now those people, if they're on the lower end of the economic spectrum, well, they need city services, they need Medicaid, there is city, county, and state costs to fulfilling those asthma inhalers and those nebulizer machines, and all that costs physical dollars that's in the millions, if not billions, every year. And it's that way because the carbon footprint is so high in those neighborhoods. And it's so high in those neighborhoods because those are the neighborhoods that always get hit with the cuts whenever there's a issue with a budget as it relates to transit, right? And if you don't roll the tape fully back that way, then in your brain, you're like, didn't we just give CTA some money? And really, you think about the times that we didn't give CTA some money and what does that lead to? So just on the health spectrum, transit plays a very vital role. And when there are more routes through more neighborhoods, you're less likely to have a car. I mean, less likely to have a car. I mean, we got electric vehicles now, but what has gone on for the last, and then even with the electric vehicles, because we've cut routes, less people can get to work in certain spaces that pay enough for you to afford an electric vehicle. So still back to funding transit. When we look at violence, it isn't, some of the violence that takes place on CTA is unfortunate and nobody appreciates that. But why are these two 16-year-olds beefing with each other on the train? Well, we closed 54 schools in their neighborhoods, and they probably wouldn't have even been on the, for us adults with jobs and families, these boundaries don't mean anything. But for kids that are growing up in marginalized spaces, gang boundaries have real consequences. And so when we close a lot of schools and you're leaving one boundary and got to go through 3 or 4 different boundaries, it adds to the percentage that there could be a violent situation or a turmoil or anything, a scuffle, any of those type of things. And so it's not directly related to the CTA. It has everything to do with what led up to that particular situation. I'm thinking there was zero reason on earth to close the 63rd and Racine train stop when they closed it, right? And then what happens to it afterwards, right? Well, it's an eyesore because of the infrastructure of the thing, it can't just disappear, right? So then what happens to those eyesores? Well, it brings down the property value on 63rd and Racine. So then when Dilla wants to start a business and I gotta, get an assessment on what the property value is to get the loan that I need to stop a place from being a food desert. They're undervaluing what I need because they're pulling value away from me based off of the train stops that got closed that didn't need to get closed that affected the ridership. Like it's all interconnected. We need to start thinking about these things as separate issues, right? I guess I'm a semi left leaning, person, right? But I just feel like humans should have the right to have a place to stay. They should have the right to health care. They shouldn't, in the richest country on earth, have to worry about food. And we, in a country that wants to bring more and more e-vehicles and lower carbon footprint, why are we talking about not properly funding transit when, y'all probably got the largest electric fleet of anybody, right? You know what I mean? Like you're already doing the things. If the example is already being set, let's fully lean into it. And we know the results of when we don't, right? But we have yet to fully lean into it to see the positive results. So that's the other thing that is very crazy to watch as you guys are in this budget impasse is, what happens when you make these cuts. The effects. How foundational those effects are and how it's going to be 2.5 decades so you can reverse that train, no pun intended. But we have never fully seen what happens when we don't go down that cliff and what the other side of that looks like. And I think it's about time that we do.
Yeah, and what an opportunity, right? So I've been trying to frame it to legislatures and everybody that you have such an opportunity in this moment to make a big statement about investing in communities and people that have been disinvested in is right in front of us, right? And it's a historical moment for transit, really. And for cities in general, I'm curious, as we wrap up here, what's your thoughts? We were talking earlier about what a historical moment we're in, right? Post pandemic, but particularly for cities. And as someone that thinks about Chicago and for cities, what are your thoughts on where we are and where we might be headed?
On the one hand, what am I supposed to say? I'm trying to be, the state of the current federal administration certainly has people worried about the funding that goes to arts, the funding that goes to preserving history, and the funding that goes to big cities that aren't fully aligned with the ideology of the federal government, right? So that certainly should be a concern for us all. On the other hand, here in Chicago, we're watching that despite that violent crime is down. We're watching that despite that we're getting ready. It's so cool when you can right a historical wrong. I have the newspaper clippings of how they were trying to extend the red line in the 1960s in the neighborhood of Roseland and Rosewood and Pullman did not want the extension because literally, it's not me being extra, they didn't want more Negroes having access to the space. And to be able to right that historical wrong and provide access to downtown to the people of Roseland and West Pullman and Argyle Heights and the Riverdale neighborhood, it's so inspiring. And so it should let us know that even in the face of diversity, we still can, in the face of adversity, we can still move forward and accomplish major, beautiful things. And it also shows for some of us that we gotta like have our skin in the game too. So take a person like Phil Beckham who built the high rises over there on 43rd Street off of the Green Line. And then you also take Bernard Lloyd who's working to preserve the Forum. And their work collectively is why that 43rd Street station is going to get a facelift in the next couple years. And so it's on us community members and activists also to say, hey, I'm having a free tour, and to get there, you got to show me your venture card, or you got to show me that you took the bus to get there. It's on us to kind of, we're going to have a Juneteenth parade. Let's not meet up at Grant Park. Let's meet at the station on 63rd and jump on, and we all just go. And even I think that'll remind people about what we have, and that'll help us push things up from the ground level up to show communities and folks in charge that this is the thing that we need, want, and deserve to have.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you mentioned the Red Line extension. I'm a big promoter. We don't have to wait till that's finished. I think every hammer that gets lifted, every person that gets hired to work on that is as inspiring as when those stations open, just because of how meaningful it is for our city. So
I'm telling you, any of us, it's been done throughout the history of Chicago. The Polish dudes that were the bricklayers, you better know that they were driving around with their family saying, hey, I built that. Hey, I built that bungalow. Hey, I built that two flat. And even me, when I was working for the utility, there are buildings downtown, the BMO bank building. There's buildings at Northwestern Avenue that I electrified. I'm the guy that pushed the button that turned the lights on for the building for the first time. There's no way on earth my kids will ever drive by any of those spaces and not hear me say that. And I think that's going to be the same thing, right? We should capture those stories of the people who say, hey, I played a part in extending this train line out to communities that need it. And we should tell the story as it happens and also when it's completed, say and engage and why we needed to do it. I know we might be still limited on time. I wanted to give you a gift, though, so that when you are down in Springfield or on vacation or wherever, you can let them know that everything dope about America comes from Chicago.
Oh, my God. I love it, Dilla. Thank you so much. To get it straight from you is so meaningful.
Yeah, it's I'm always telling people that, too. And every now and again, somebody will try me on it like, well, what do you mean it comes from shit? I had a guy ask me that question while eating a chocolate brownie. I was like, hey, you just made it easy. If you don't think so, throw that thing away you're eating because you can thank us for it, right? Even, it's my understanding that the first anything to ever use the third rail of electricity, electrified, was a passenger train taking people to the World's Fair here in Chicago, right? So, even the way that's how modern transit is done across the globe, not just in the country. It comes from Chicago. So, set precedent a very, very long time.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I just love the sentiment makes you kind of sit up a little straighter with pride about where we are.
Yep.
So I love this. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And so thank you, Dilla. For more stories of the CTA, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast, which you can find on all major platforms. Let us know what stories you want to hear. I'm Nora Leerhsen. Thanks for listening.